Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, "What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he?" "The son of David," they replied. He said to them, "How is it then that David, speaking by the Spirit, calls him Lord? For he says, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet.' If then David called him Lord, how can he be his son?" No one could say a word in reply, and from that day on, no one dared ask him any more questions.
Would you stand again, please, as we sing? Come.
Love the Lord, and let our joys be known. Join in a song with sweet accord. Join in a song with sweet accord. And thus around the throne, and thus around the throne. We're marching to Zion. Beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upward to Zion. City of God. Let those refuse to sing who never knew our God, but children of the heavenly King, but children of the heavenly King, may speak their joys abroad, may speak their joys abroad. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upward to Zion, the beautiful city of God. Let those our songs abound and every tear be dry. We're marching through Emmanuel's ground. We're marching through Emmanuel's ground to fairer worlds on high, to fairer worlds on high. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upward to Zion, the beautiful city of God.
Be seated, please.
Am I good? Good. Oh, Alex, I've changed my mind. I'll do that. I told Tommy, I said, now I've got all my notes ready, so if I back out of this, he had my back to cover this, but I think I'm okay. I think we're going to be fine. Well, good morning. When I woke up this morning and it was thundering and lightning, I hope there wasn't a bad omen of things to come. I know we need the rain, but it was kind of disconcerting at first. I don't know if it was Mark Skelton or Alex who started using the term church family. I've heard it before, but they've used it several times. Mark has the term when he gets up as the closing, says, "Good morning, church." And I really like that term. I think it describes who we are. It describes who we are as a family. The concept of a church family, I myself, I find very comforting. It gives me a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, wonderful opportunities for fellowship. Tommy last night came over to the house and helped me with a little project, and we got that done and then stood around for 30 minutes just visiting. And to me, that's very comforting. And I know I can do that with a number of people that I consider my family here. It's a group of people that I not only trust and love, but I know that myself and my family can depend on you in times of need. I think that's something outside of a church family are actually looking for, if you think about it. Luann and I the other night were talking about church family. And kind of reminiscing about, I guess, times past. Luann and I were just babies when we got married. I was 19, and I waited 3 days after she turned 18 to marry her. So I was legal in Arkansas. We were, now I shudder to think my girls, if they'd gotten married at that young of age, I'd have probably run the guy off. But we were talking about being in this church family and got to talking about things that happened when we were younger. And Luann got to telling me a story, and she was telling me this story, and I told her, I said, look, just write it down. I'll never remember it. And Bill and Nana, I just want to apologize to y'all because this is about y'all. It's a good story. It's not a bad story, but Luann's got a comment in here that I don't know. So Luann writes this story. She says, it's from my perspective, but she wrote it. Luann and I just started attending church here, North Heights, in 1981. We were married, like I said, when we were very young, at 18. We were probably the youngest couple at the congregation. Most of our friends, and here's the bad part, no, maybe not. Most of our friends were a little older than us, including our friends Bill and Nana. Sorry, she wrote this. During that time, Nana and Bill had already adopted Shelby, and Nana wanted to learn to play tennis, and one of the other ladies here, one of the younger moms, agreed to teach her. After one of their practices, Nana and her friend and the kids ended up at Bill and Nana's house. When the friends started to leave, she realized that the battery was dead on her car. Now, Clint and Norma Walker, several of you here probably remember Clint and Norma. They lived just up the street, and the woman knew Clint, and since he was a Christian brother, she knew he would be more than willing to come down and jump the car. Now, these two little girls were playing outside and kind of getting underfoot, and Nana told them they needed to go in the house so that they wouldn't get in Clint's way. The girls looked at their moms and begged to stay outside. And Shelby said, if we go in, we'll miss it when Clint jumps over the car. 2 points here. Actually, 3 points. First point is, guys, this is why we get in trouble, because our wives remember all this stuff. Okay? But really, the 2 points is kids have a tendency to take what we say very literally. They couldn't wait to see in their mind. They were waiting for Clint to come down and jump over that car. And they weren't going nowhere until they saw that. But the most important thing is that they knew Clint was a Christian brother. He'd be more than willing to come down and help. And that's what family does. At this same time period in my life, I suffered from I still do, but it's more under control. I suffer from what's called night terrors. And when you sleep at night, your body, your brain shuts down your body. So when you have a nightmare, you don't get up and run and do things while you're sleeping. At this point in my life, my brain, something was wrong, and I didn't. In fact, when I was, not long before I met Luann, I actually, in a dream, went through a window and fell 15 feet. That's a whole story in itself. But I still suffered from these night terrors when we were married. And there are many interesting stories there, too. I won't go into that. The point is this. They had a ladies' retreat. And I know Nana went, and I think Sandy Rummel went. And Luann was, of course, concerned about me being there by myself, and stressors and things like that would set off these nightmares. So my brother, Don Rummel, came over, and I don't remember if it was at our house or his house, but came over and spent the evening with me. And I don't remember exactly what we did. I know we talked, we told stories. He regaled me with life experiences. He's always got great stories. It worked. We stayed up late, we visited, we had a good time. He went home. I slept like a baby. Now, don't get it that he's boring, because he's not. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that as a brother in Christ, he cared enough about me to come over. And you know, the other interesting thing about Don and I is we both have the same middle name. And if we want you to know, we'll tell you. The other thing, when Luann and I were talking about family, and this hit me as her and I were talking, y'all don't know this, but the very first person who was my friend when I moved to Arkansas is sitting right here. Tim Hurley. A lot of y'all know him as Buck. My sister lived in Meadow Heights up here, just up the road. And we visited several summers before we moved out here. And my sister introduced me to Tim, and we'd run around. If you're ever up in the Meadow Heights area, that ravine when we were little was just about empty, wasn't it, Tim? We could see across, and now it's full of trees. He was the first guy who befriended me when I moved to Arkansas. And I still have this vision of us sitting on the front porch of my sister's house, and Tim had a little motorbike. You had a paper route, didn't you, Tim? And I remember him zipping back and by delivering papers. And my brother-in-law, Smiley, who happens to be Peyton Weaver's cousin, I see a lot of my brother-in-law in Peyton, real dry, kind of like Peyton, real dry sense of humor. Tim goes zipping by. He's got on his helmet and his face shield, and Smiley says, if that boy didn't have that face shield on, he'd get his teeth full of bugs. There's always been a friend. I thought of that when Luann and I were talking about this. And I'm sure that probably everyone here, you've probably got stories of North Heights, or of a congregation you've attended. And those are wonderful memories to remember. And I cherish those friendships deeply. It just emphasizes the tremendous blessings that we have here as a church family at North Heights. But sometimes with those blessings comes less enjoyable circumstances that happen in any family. I don't think I've ever watched the show, but there is, or I think it may still be on, is a television show called Interventions. If memory serves, it's a type of docudrama for all intensive purposes. But it's about friends or family intervening in the life of a loved one, one last-ditch effort to save them from some emotional or physical peril. Sometimes this is needed because all other attempts to help that person have failed. It's a technique of being very clear, very direct, very succinct. Charlotte Foster and Tommy probably know what I'm talking about. They may not use this term, but in the world of HR, I call it using the ball peen hammer. And it's basically, don't get me wrong, we don't actually do this, but it's the idea of being so direct that sometimes it's like hitting somebody right here with a ball peen hammer, because everything else has failed up to this point. It's a metaphor. It's a point or an attempt to try and get across to this person the things that you want. The thing is, did you know Christ did this? He did this very thing in Matthew chapter 23. Before we look at 23, let's lay some groundwork. Bill read the last verses in 22, but what I want to go back and just emphasize is actually verse 46. He says, no one was able to answer him a word. Nor did anyone dare to ask him any more questions. We often, and we know this, that Christ went willingly to the cross. He was crucified. But he had things he wanted to say. He had things he wanted to address. He no longer had this means of public discourse with the crowds. And so he addressed it directly because time was running out. And I think we've all experienced that. He changed his approach. He wanted to be real direct. Which, if you think about it, it seems pretty incredible that he had to be so direct with this group of people. I mean, all things he had done prior to this. He changed the water to wine. He had healed the lame and the sick. He had fed the multitudes, not once, twice. He'd raised the dead. He'd calmed the seas. But still, he had to use this technique. Before we read chapter 23, the other thing we have to realize is, listen, as I read it, listen to the passion. Listen to the emotion that Christ put into this. It's his final plea. As I said, it's his last public discourse before he's crucified. Just the exclamation point's enough. Have you ever gotten a text or an email from somebody and it's all in capitals? What does that mean? They're yelling at you. Or maybe they forgot to hit the cap button. It depicts emotion. It depicts emotion. Last but not least, we've got to understand this, and this is probably the most important thing. Just like when someone does an intervention, they do it not out of anger, not out of hate, and not because they want to punish someone. They do it because they love that person dearly. And that's the message. And this is why Christ speaks to the Jews the way he does in chapter 23. So let's look at chapter 23. Matthew chapter 23. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on the Moses seat. So do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do, for they preach, but do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and they lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. They do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long, and they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces and being called rabbi by others. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And call no man father on earth, for you have one Father who is in heaven. Neither be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Christ. The greatest among you shall be a servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. For you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you travel across the sea and the land and make a single proselyte. And when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools! Which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? And you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by his oath. You blind men! For which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel? Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside also may be clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like the whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. so you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous and say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would have not taken part with them in the shedding of the blood of the prophets. Thus you witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers, you serpents, you brood of vipers. How are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore I will send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. The city that kills the prophets and stones those.
See me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. It's pretty passionate when you look at the words, when you understand the meaning. Sometimes we understand or misunderstand the word discipline. Think about it. If you remove the I and the N from discipline, you have the word disciple, which is a synonym, I can say that right, for student. Discipline and disciple are derived from the Latin word discipline, meaning to learn. Christ's purpose isn't to show anger or hatred or to punish, but to love and to show compassion. He wanted these individuals to become his disciples. This is very evident when he uses the analogy of the hen, and that hen bringing those chicks under her wing. I've got to share a story with you. Joanne and I were talking about this the other night. My brother-in-law, Tommy Bowles, works with the congregation in Acts Flight. And Tommy, like many, was raised on a farm. You know, cows, chickens, goats, mules, whole 9 yards, hunting dogs, always been a big hunter. Well, not long ago, him and his grandson, Kyler, Lynn, how old is Kyler? 4? Okay. About 4 years old. They're outside doing around, and this hen has got a brand new brood of baby chicks. Well, being a 4-year-old, Kyler starts chasing the chicks. Tommy snaps his finger and says, Kyler, you leave those chicks alone, that mama's going to get you. Yes, Paw, you know. Well, he does something. He goes around the corner, and he's not gone but a little bit. He hears Kyler screaming, bloody murder. So he comes rushing around the house, and Kyler is on the ground, on his back, and this hen is on top of him, beating the pee-waddly out of him. I mean, just her wings and just doing everything she can to hurt him. Well, he rushes over and he gets the hen off and he picks him up. Of course, crying and carrying on. He holds him for a little bit and he gets him to calm down. And he said, you were chasing them hens, weren't you? And he said, no, Paw. What were you doing? I was throwing rocks at them. He took this as an opportunity. Number one, he said, I couldn't spank him. He said he kind of learned his lesson. But he did explain to him, he said, Kyler, that's why God created that hen, to protect her chicks. And she'll do anything she has to do, which included attacking something many, many, many times her own size to protect her babies from danger. And in the same way, that's how Christ wants us to protect. That's how he wants to protect us.
if we're willing. Think about it. Matthew 23, he talks to a group of people who were liars, who were hypocrites, who were so hypocritical to the point that they were not only preventing themselves from entering heaven, but they were preventing other people from entering heaven. They were thieves and they were murderers. And yet, if they were willing, he would have gladly welcomed them back into the fold of his grace, mercy, and forgiveness. I don't know about you, but I found that absolutely, positively amazing. So the question here is simply, why wait? In Acts chapter 8, the Ethiopian eunuch asked Peter that very question. Why wait? We just read about a group of individuals who don't have the best pedigree, probably the worst pedigree. And yet, if they were willing, Christ would accept them. Why are you any different? Don't wait until things get better. Tell yourself, I have to be a better person before I make a commitment. There's no time like the present. What's your excuse? Come up with one. Come up with one. You don't have one. I don't have one. What's your reasoning? I'm telling you right now, whatever it is, whatever's preventing you from making that change, it's irrelevant. You're probably all familiar with the story of Jesus when he told the story of the prodigal son. And some of the things that boy did, as Charles Barkley might say, were just terrible. Just terrible. He did bad things. But yet, when that son made the choice and realized the mistake he had made, and when he came back, when his father saw him at a distance, he didn't wait for his son to come home. He ran to him and enveloped him and welcomed him back home, even with all the awful things he had done. He was so glad that his son was back in the fold. And that's the same attitude. That's the same message that Christ is telling us here. That's what God does. No matter what we've done, no matter what we've filled our lives with, he will run to us and he will gather us to him. It's as simple as that. It's not a difficult lesson. Whether it's to put Christ on through baptism or to come back to the church family that loves you. Simply put, make the difference, make the choice. Now, stand as we sing.